Hey guys, welcome back. Something a little bit different for you guys today. I've actually got 3 Celtic folk tales, all of which I have told on this channel before, but this time they're woven together in a bit of a narrative, and I told them last weekend for Beltane, and we had a little Beltane festival here on the farm. Beltane, great time for storytelling. And my partner Tamsin is also playing some music in this little seed of a show called Celtic Tides that we are taking on the road in a week's time around Britain and Ireland, and we're going to develop the show while we're driving around in our van. Here she is, although it's actually going to be green like this. So if you want to support us on our journey and follow what's happening, then do please like and subscribe. If you want to help us put fuel in our van, then do please follow me on Patreon. That'll help a lot. No pressure though. Thank you very much for watching, guys. Welcome, guys. Thank you for coming and sharing some stories with us. Tamsin and I are going on tour in 2 weeks' time. We've got 3 gigs booked, hoping for more. So we are doing a show called Celtic Tides of Celtic folklore from Britain and Ireland. And today we've got 3 stories, haven't we? We've got one from Wales, one from Scotland, and one from Ireland. So this first one is called Kedwin and her Cauldron. Long ago, long ago, in deep time, in myth time, there was a witch, a sorceress, if you like, and her name was Ceridwen. Now, she was older than the old. She was possibly older than the earth itself. And she had a husband. His name was Tegid the Bald. And they lived together in a little hut in the forest of what would now be South Wales somewhere. Now, Tegid and Ceridwen, they had 2 children. The first was a daughter. Now, she was radiant and beautiful and kind and intelligent and just a joy to be around. The other, a son, his name was Avagdu, well, he wasn't. He was stupid and he was ugly. Terrible combination, especially in these dark days before time. So, Ceridwen, with all her power, she knew if she was to give her son Avagdu the best chance in the world, she would have to help him somehow with her magic. Now, she couldn't make him beautiful. Even she didn't have the power to do that. But she could make him wise and powerful beyond the dreams of any mortal man. The way she did this was by brewing a certain potion in a cauldron. Now, this was a very, very tricky thing. Only Kedwin could make such a brew. But she would have to make this potion for a year and a day. And she would have to go out by moonlight and collect all the right herbs and plants. And sometimes she would have a dog helping her, aiding, grabbing all these plants. Hello, my boy. And the thing with this potion is she would have to have it constantly on the boil or a sort of low simmer. It couldn't be boiling too much or too little. So she had to have 2 slaves, right? She had one old, blind, senile old slave, and his job it was just to stir the cauldron because it had to be constantly stirred for a whole year and a day. And then she had another slave, just a boy, a little peasant boy, plucked from a nearby village, and his name was Gwion Bar, and it's him that's the hero of this story. Now, Gwion's job, just a small boy, had never known anything outside of the forest. His job it was to collect kindling and sticks and logs to keep that cauldron bubbling away for a year and a day, while Ceridwen went out into the forest and collected her herbs and plants. So, this went on for 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months. The potion now was nearly ready. Now, there's a thing you need to know about this potion. This particular brew, only the first 3 drops contained all the knowledge, all the collected human knowledge, and all the power and all the magic to see all things in the future, all things in the past, all things very far away, the power to change shape, All these things were in the first 3 drops. The rest of it, once you had drunk the 3 drops, was poison, right? That's sort of the deal with this potion. So, potion nearly ready now, bubbling away. And Ceridwen, she just has a few more herbs to gather from the forest. So she says to Gwyonbach, "Don't you let that cauldron go out, keep it bubbling, or I'll kill you," or something to that effect. So off she goes into the forest, leaving Gwion alone, gathering their wood, and that senile blind old man stirring away. But something happens, something that Ceridwen, for all her power, didn't anticipate. That old man just lies down and goes to sleep. Thank you very much. I needed some sound effects. That left Gwion not only to keep the fire lit beneath that cauldron. Hello, friends, come, join us. We're having Ceridwen's cauldron. You brought a bone with you, so that's very, very good.
I get that a lot.
There's a witch, her name is Kedwin. She's brewing a cauldron for her son. It contains all the knowledge and all the power and all the collected wisdom of mankind. Pretty powerful stuff. And her little slave, Gwyonbach, is there alone, frantically stirring this cauldron. And the cauldron is ready now, and there's a big bubble just comes to the surface, and 3 drops of that potion just sail into the air and land on Gwyonbach's thumb, and he instinctively puts his hand in his mouth, and his little head is blown open. Not literally, that would be silly. And he suddenly sees all the knowledge of everything. He sees everything. He has drunk the potion that was intended for Ceridwen's son, Avagdu, and he can see all his past lives stretching out behind him, when he was an animal in a cave, when he was a fox, when he was a badger, maybe living in a hole, when he was born in this forest not too far away from here. He could see all civilizations rising and falling back in history. He could see far, far places through the mists of space and time. He could suddenly see and understand all the thoughts of all the animals and beings around him. He could see that blind old slave lying on the ground. He could see his dreams. And when he looked through the wall of that hut, which would suddenly become like glass, he could see Kedwin a mile away collecting herbs. She could see her mind. And as soon as he locked eyes with her, she locked eyes with him across the mists of time, across mind. And he, Gwyonbach, suddenly knew that Kedwin meant him harm. In that moment, the cauldron, the rest of it, turned to poison, and the cauldron split open and put out the fire. It consumed that blind slave lying on the floor. He was just bones and muck now. And Ceridwen, she, like a great whirlwind of malintent, sped through the forest, tearing a path through old oak trees, and ripped right through the doorway of that hut. And she was just about to tear Gwyonbach into 2. But Gwion, he could see her coming, and he thought suddenly, quickly, if only I could become a hare, slip through her legs. And as soon as he thought that, he changed and became a hare, and indeed did slip between Ceridwen's legs and out into the forest and away into the darkness, over barrows, through tree stumps, away into freedom. But Ceridwen could transform too, and if Gwyonbach could become a hare, then Ceridwen would become a hound, and become a hound she did, and she chased after Gwyonbach through the forest, through the tangled nest, closer and closer, gnashing, closer and closer to Gwion, the little hare. But Gwion was turning, but there in front of him was a river running fast and dark. Let's say it's the River Wye. I don't know why. And Gwion is stuck now, and there's nowhere to go, and that hound, Ceridwen, is gaining on him, and Gwion leaps into the water in hare form, and he thinks, oh shit, if only I could swim. And in that moment, Gwyonbach became a salmon, and plopped into the river, and swam upstream, swift, up the scaly road, because salmon can swim upstream, I'm told, upstream. But if Gwyonbach could become a salmon, then Ceridwen could become an otter. And become an otter she did, and plopped into that river and swam upstream after Guillaume Bark, the little salmon, chasing closer and closer and closer to his little salmony tail. And then Guillaume Bark comes to, oh shit, a waterfall. He swims up that waterfall, gets to the very top, but that otter just comes straight up. I don't know whether otters can scale waterfalls, but in this story they can. And that otter is going up that waterfall, and then Guillaume Bark, the salmon, just bursts out of the top of that waterfall into the air, to spray of water droplets against the moonlit sky. And then he reaches the apex of that arc and begins to fall back down towards the gnashing jaws of that otter. And then he thinks, oh shit, if only I could fly. And in that moment, Guillaume Bark became a bird, a sparrow, swift, and he wheeled up into the sky, into the shifting, clouding skies. But if Guillaume Bark could become a sparrow, then Kedwin could become a sparrowhawk, and turn into a sparrowhawk she did, and they wheeled after one another in a dance of death into the sky, and that little sparrow's heart was beginning to beat faster and faster. The power was ebbing out of its little wings, and that sparrowhawk was gaining, not quite as agile, but stronger, faster. And Guillaume Bark knew he had to do something quick. And there, just then, he saw in the forest below a clearing and a little human village and a great barn. And he descended down in a spiral and just rotated himself and flew through one of the slits in that barn. And there, inside the barn, was great piles of wheat. It was harvest time, threshing season. Great piles of grain on the floor, millions of grains. And in midair he thought, I'm going to be a bit of grain. And he turned into one tiny little piece of grain and plop. Thank you. Hidden among 1,000 other grains. And Ceridwen, meanwhile, she had landed and turned herself back into her own form, and she pushed open the gates of that barn, and then she saw all those grains, and she knew Guillaume Bark was one of them. So you know what she did? She turned herself into a black hen, so says the story. And she began to eat those mounds of grain, one after the other, pecking. She's a magic hen. She can eat 1 billion grains of, grain, all right? She's pecking away, until there's just one grain left. It's Guillaume Bark. And she says, I've got you now, you little shit. And she ate him alive. And then turned herself back into her human form, put her hand on her belly, and smiled with the satisfaction, knowing that she had eaten Guillaume Bark. And then, oh, bugger. She knew, in that way all women know, yep, she was up the duff. Guillaume Bark had transformed himself into a little seed. And now, Kedwin would have to wait 9 months to kill him! But wait she did, sitting by the fire every night with Tegid, her husband, rubbing her sweaty hands together, thinking of all the ways she was going to slay her yet unborn child. Was she going to just throw him into the fire? Was she going to cut herself open and rip him apart? Was she going to feed him to the dogs? But when that 9-month period came and she gave birth to the most beautiful boy she had ever laid eyes upon, and she did not have the heart to kill him. Mummy's instinct kicked in. So she did this. She wrapped him in sort of swaddling cloth and put him in a little basket, Moses style, and put him in the river, and he floated downstream. Maybe it took several days, weeks, years. He floated out of myth time into history, out into the sea, into the Bay of Cardigan, where there was a castle. And the king of Aberystwyth had a son, and he was very lazy. And he was a very bad prince, and he liked to spend all his time fishing. And then one day he was fishing on the sea, and he caught a great big fish, and hauled it in, but it was no fish. It was a bloody baby in a basket. And he uncovered it, And this child, it was like nothing you've ever seen before. He had shining eyes, like a third eye. And he said, I'm going to call you Taliesin, which means shining brow. And he took the little child back to the court of his father, you know, because he thought it'd be very interesting. And a funny thing happened in that short journey in the boat back to the castle. He had grown from, you know, like a yay big little baby into a sort of, I don't know, like a regular-sized child. And he thought, that's a bit strange. And that little child walked straight into the court of the king of Aberystwyth and said, in perfect, pure Welsh, my name is Taliesin, and I will be your storyteller.
Fill a cauldron of love, fill a cauldron of wisdom. Fill a cauldron of love with herbs from this land. Stoke up the fire for a year and a day. Hey, hey, oh. Made for my son. Stole from peasant hands. And I come, you change, I change. We end up in the grain, and I'll see you again in 9 months to the day. And I come, you change, I change. We end up in the grain, and I'll see you again in 9 months to the day. Sail my beautiful boy away. Sail my beautiful boy away. Oh, Taliesin, take my stories to the grave. Sail my beautiful boy away. Sail my beautiful boy away. Oh, Taliesin, sail my stories away.
So Taliesin became the first and greatest of all the Welsh bards, passing on the folklore and all the stories and selling them down across the sea in a little coracle of myth that floated over the Irish Sea, up across the Western Isles of Scotland, where the Selkies live. Selkies are seal people, shapeshifters. They're kind of I guess like a class of fairy that live in the other world, a land under the sea, kind of like a different dimension. So this story is from the Western Isles of Scotland. Thanks, babe. That was awesome.
Thank you. Well, we're just going
Very
to...
good.
Thank you.
So,
I don't remember all the bloody words.
once there was a fisherman. He was a nice fisherman, and this happened long ago, but not so long ago. Not as long ago as the first story. This is kind of in living history, this story. So there was a fisherman, and he lived alone in a hut on the Western Isles, and he was a bit of a loner. He hadn't had much luck with women or men or anyone really in his younger days, and any friends or half friends he ever had gone on and got married and had kids and made families, but he still lived alone, and he caught some fish, and he would take those fish to market, and he would make a little bit of money, just enough to get by, really. But he was lonely. He was. I'm sure some of us know the feeling. Now, one night, it was full moon, and he was fishing late. And he hadn't had very much luck, so he just was fishing a little bit later. You know, he could see by the light of the moon, and the shoals were kind of moving. But he caught bugger all, just a few little fish. And he made his way back to the little place where he moored his little boat in a desolate part of the island. And he was walking across a bay that he didn't walk across very often, and it was all beautiful silver in the moonlight. And then he stopped. He caught his breath because he saw a sight he had never seen before. There were people dancing, naked in the moonlight, dancing round, dancing round, dancing round, and he crouched behind a rock and looked. And then he saw grey shapes moving out of the slate grey waves, bobbing. He recognised them. They were seals, and they moved out of the water, and they would peel off their skins and then step naked out of their seal skins, and they would deposit their seal skins on the rocks and then join the dancers. And he could see people playing strange instruments. He could hear no music, just see the dancers, see the dancers. And then something changed, maybe the wind, maybe something in his mind. But these dancers, they all stopped and looked around, fearfully, as if they could sense that something was amiss. And they all quickly went and gathered their seal skins and slipped them back on over their bodies and bloop, back down beneath the waves, back to whichever land they came from. Now this fisherman, he had heard the folklore, and he knew that these seal folk were Selkies, shapeshifters, and he knew that they couldn't transform without their skins. And he saw that they had all left beneath the waves now, but there was one, just one, beautiful seal woman. And as often happens in these old stories, he fell deeply in love with her, just with the very movement of her limb, with the shape of her face, with everything. And he just thought, I have to have her. And just as he thought that, something just bloop, touched against his foot. Something had washed up against in the surf. It was a little grey thing. He picked it up. It was a seal skin. And suddenly he understood. He understood. And he saw this seal woman frantically looking around among the rocks, and he had this, and for a minute he thought, I don't know why he did it, but he thought he could have gone to give it to her, but he didn't. He didn't do that. Instead he ran across the beach, back to his little hut, and he hid it behind the fireplace, hidden up in the rafters of his little hut. And then he just got a coat and a blanket, thinking quickly, his mind racing with dark, impure thoughts. And he ran back to the beach, and he had the two little fish he caught that day. He had a little bit of whiskey in a little bottle. He had a blanket, he had a coat, and he went, and she was still there, the seal woman, still in a right old state, tears pouring down her face. And he said, hey, don't be afraid. And she shrunk away. Watch the steps, they're very slippery. And she was fearful at first, but then he offered her some of the fish she caught, and she just sort of gulped them down. And then he gave her some whiskey, and she drank that. And then he was like, "Here, wear this." And he put the coat around her, and she spoke in a old Scottish dialect. You could barely get her mouth around the words, but she said tragically, "I've lost my skin. I've lost my skin." And the fisherman, he said, "Shh, it's okay. We'll find it in the morning. Come back with me. I have a fire, I have food. Keep me warm. Keep me safe." Well, what choice did she have? So she went back to the hut of that little fisherman, and she gave her a nice, I don't know, bowl of broth and a nice fire and a wee dram of whiskey. And the next day they went looking for the skin, but of course they couldn't find it because they'd hidden it behind the chimney. And the next day they looked again, Well, one thing led to another, and that seal woman, I don't know, Stockholm syndrome, gradually fell in love with that fisherman in a way, and bore him 3 children. She loved him in a way, but he loved her utterly. He was utterly devoted to her, and he worked hard. You know, he would fish from morning till night to feed his new family, and sometimes she would sing the most beautiful songs in a strange, forgotten language, and he didn't know the words, but he was so happy. He thought he could die. The villagers began to talk, though. Where did this woman come from? Sometimes they'd go down the local pub together and she would sing there too, and the whole pub would shut up. So beautiful, the sound of her singing these Selkie songs. But yeah, the villagers did start to talk, because sometimes she was seen at dusk conversing with a seal on the beach in a strange language. And then when someone came, she would look and that seal would plop beneath the waves. And sometimes she would just sit alone by the sea, looking wistfully out at the seals playing on the rocks. And one day, when those kids had grown up a bit, that fisherman had taken the oldest two out fishing, because it was time they learned, Dad's craft, but left the youngest, a wee boy, at home. And she was just gazing out of the window of that little cottage with a great sadness in her eyes. And that little boy, bless him, said, "Mummy, what's wrong?" But, in a Scottish accent. And for some reason, she said the truth. She said the truth, the first time ever. She said, "My darling boy, I didn't belong here. Your mummy is a seal, and I live beneath the sea. But many, many years ago, I lost my skin, and I can never return." And something in that cherubic little face of his just sort of changed. And he scrambled up behind the chimney and pulled out an old chest and opened it and said, "Is this it, Mummy?" So many emotions passed through that Selkie wife's mind, then joy, elation, relief, and then anger. Quite a lot of anger when she realised what her husband had done. And she hugged her son and said how much she loved him. And then she took that skin and she ran as fast as her human little legs could carry her to the sea. Shortly after, the fisherman, he got back and he found out what had happened and he ran after her. He ran. He realised his whole lie had been blown wide open, and he ran to the beach, and there it was dusk and there was a whole battalion of seals out in the sea, and they were singing this song, this ancient song. They were calling to her, and she had her skin in her hand and she was just putting it back on over her shoulders, and she turned around and she looked at her husband, and everything was in that look. There was love, there was sadness, there was anger. And she said nothing. She put on that skin and slipped beneath the waves. And he never saw her again, not in this form, anyway. But from that day on, that fisherman, his nets were always full. And those kids, man, they grew up wise. And sometimes they would be walking along the beach and they would just see a little seal just bobbing along. And sometimes the most tremendous luck happened to them. Pearls or old coins or strange messages in bottles would just wash up at their feet when they were walking along. And when their dad passed away, they lived in that little hut on the seaside, the three of them. And everyone knew them as the Seal people. And that's the end of this story. Thank you.
Thank you.
I just remember the words.
Pardon?
I just remember all the words.
Makes you up.
He does.
Under the big sky, on the horizon, dancing with no clothes on, singing their sweet song, skin almost human, hair made of silver and gold, and in the full moon gives you freedom.
So those seals, they took their stories, they took them back over the Irish Sea again. There's a bit of a theme here, trying to weave these stories together in some kind of weird narrative. So these seals, they sort of fled, they took their folklore, they took their myths, they took their stories over to the Green Isle of Erin, Ireland. Now here, there's a wonderful group, a wonderful body of folklore. It's called the Fenian Cycle, if you're a myth nerd like me. And it's about this dog. No, it's not really. It's about Finn McCool. Finn McCool he's a sort of precursor to King Arthur in many ways. A lot of the same sort of characters feature in the story of these warrior poets of old Ireland. So they would defend Ireland from attack, but they would also just sort of dedicate their lives to cultivating beauty, a bit like all of you guys, to be honest. So they would just create beautiful poems. They would play beautiful music, but the rest of the time they'd spend all their time hunting, or I don't know, in battle if necessary. And Finn McCool, he was their leader, and he was a great man. But this story isn't about Finn McCool. This story is about his son, Ośin. Ośin, it means little deer because, well, his mum was a deer, but that's another story.
Happens in Vegas, stays in Vegas.
Yep. So this is the very last story in the whole Fenian cycle. It's just this amazing, rich tapestry of strangeness filled with fairies and sea gods and Vikings and all sorts of stuff like that. Hello, my boy. And lots of hounds in these stories, including one that has a human mind, a bit like you, mate. So, this is the last story in the Fenian cycle, and this was after the last battle that the Fianna had ever fought. They'd finally driven away the enemies of Erin and Alba, of Ireland and Britain. Finally, well, at least for a few hundred years. And they were making their way back, and they were tired, they were exhausted. There was a certain kind of heaviness upon them. They knew they were reaching the end of something. And then something happened, and what we call in myth an initiatory moment. And it's always the same in a lot of these old Irish stories. It's a bloody deer again. It's a stag that bursts out of the foliage, and those Fianna, those warrior poets that were making their steady way home from the battlefield to the plain of Tara, where the High King of Ireland dwells, where they were, obviously had some feasting and mead to be drinking, but not now, because there's a deer, and it burst across the trail, and it was white. And if ever there's a white deer in your dream or in a story, it's leading to something very exciting. So next time you see one, metaphor or no, follow it. And that's what the Fianna did. They chased. All the hounds gave chase. The warriors shaked off their weary limbs and chased this deer that went bursting through the forest, over the old burial mounds, through the glades, further and further and further into the deep, dark forest, and then out into a great bay, a huge bay right on the west coast of Ireland, where we're taking the show, actually. So we should probably visit this bay and find out where it is. Anyway, segue. And this deer went out into the bay and then was gone. And all the Fianna just trickled out into this bay, and they were like, well, where the bloody hell's that deer gone? But in an Irish accent. And there was something, the sea. This is the wild Atlantic way. Normally a great stormy torment had become flat, like glass. And there was something white, almost like a piece of the sun had just dropped to the horizon, and was just getting bigger and bigger and bigger, coming towards the Fianna, who had stood up, their feet in the surf, wonder upon their faces as this light resolved itself into the shape of a horse, a white horse. And on that horse's back was a woman. No ordinary woman. She had when you read this story, there's just great reams of poetry about how much of a fucking hottie this girl is, right? So use your own imaginations. So she's riding on the back of this horse, and she just rides right over the surf, Jesus style. Her horse is Jesus! And then she rides up the beach and right up to the leader of the Fianna, Finn McCool himself. And she said, Finn McCool, many, many, many miles I have ridden to find you. And Finn McCool's always very gracious, so I don't know, he doffed his helmet or whatever and said, you know, what can I do for you, fine young woman such as yourself? It was clear she was from the other world. It was clear she was not human. And this woman said, my name is Niambh, and I am the daughter of the king of Tir na no. That is Irish for the land of the ever young. It's one of the other worlds in Celtic mythology. And she said, I've not come for you, Finn McCool, I've come for your son, Ośin, right there. And Ośin had been sheepishly sort of standing at the back here, but he had been looking, and every fibre of his being had fallen in love with this strange horse-riding fairy woman. And she rode up to Ośin and said, Finn, will you come with me back to the land of Tir na no and be my husband? And Ośin said, I will. It's the right answer. So tears were upon the faces of all the Fianna as they hugged Ośin goodbye. He's like, are you sure you don't want to come back and, you know, have all the mead with us? No, I'm going to go with her. And off they went, riding across the sea. Ośin riding on the back of that horse, his arms round Niambh, the waist of this fairy maiden, and they rode across the Atlantic, across that sea flat as glass. And I don't know, where are we going? Said Ośin. It's like, you must not ask me that, said Niambh. Trust me, trust me. Okay. And they kept riding, and then a storm came out of the west. And Ośin said, don't you think we'd better turn around? He said, it's okay, trust me. The waves getting higher, and a great column of mist, a great tumult of vapour rising up, and the waves getting higher, and I don't know, there's columns of fire erupting out of the sea, and water coming out of the heavens down below. There's steam, there's smoke, and the water is rising up into a great solid wall, a vertical wall of water riding right up, and that horse is going straight towards it, and Ośin's hands are growing tight around Niambh's waist, and then door opens in the water and they go straight through it, and Ośin and Niambh find themselves riding in an open green plain covered in wild flowers. There's no mud, just beautiful fruit trees laden with strange fruit, and a city on the horizon made of glass and light and rainbows and magic. Beautiful to behold, like nothing he had ever seen, nothing existed on Earth, still doesn't. And they rode right up to this white temple with columns, and all these fairly dressed people were pouring out of the steps, and dressed in silver and gold and flowers and things in their hair, and they were just the most beautiful people. They were a little taller than Ośin. They're quite sort of elegant, fairy people. And one of them, he was wearing a crown, I think he was the king. He said, Ośin, welcome. We've been waiting a long time for you. And there was a wedding feast. And I tell you one thing, if the first day of that wedding feast was not the best, nor was it the worst. And they feasted long and hard, and Ośin was married to Niambh, and she bore him 3 children, a bit of a theme, always 3. And he stayed there for, well, you know, about 3 years he stayed there. And everything was exactly as Niambh had described it on that long horse journey. Anything Ośin wanted, it was provided to him. He only had to think it, and it was given. If he wanted to hear music, it suddenly started playing in his ear like some sort of, you know, like a iPod. It was incredible. But after a while, you know, even paradise gets a bit old. And he longed to see Ireland again, you know? Nostalgia, let's call it. He wanted to see his friends. He longed for the hunt. Everything was too perfect here, wonderful as it was. And he obviously expressed all this to Niambh and said, you know, can I borrow that white horse of yours and go back through the doorway in the sea and visit Ireland? And she said, aye, you can, but you'll never come back. And Ośin said, what are you talking about? Of course I'll come back. I just want to I just want to see Finn McCool again. I want to see the leader. I want to see my friends. I want to see Dermot. I want to see Gol MacMorna with his hairy back. I don't know. I just want to drink a horn of mead with my friends and just hang out. And Niambh said, my dear sweet one, bright star of my whole understanding. Everyone you knew in Ireland is dead. 3 years have passed here. 300 years have passed there. No one is alive. And Ośin said, you never told me that. I'm sorry. I'm going. I'm taking the horse and I will be right back. And Niambh said, promise me this. Do not let your feet touch the ground of Ireland. If they do, you cannot return. Ośin said, duly noted, but in Irish. And off he rode on that white horse, back across the sea, through the great wall, the great gateway between dimensions, and onto the shores of Ireland he trotted, or nearly there. He was walking on with his Jesus horse just along the beach, and he saw all these little people come out of these squalid little dwellings. Man, Ireland was populated now, and the people, they'd shrunk. They were like little people now. They were all little and they were ugly. And he came onto the beach, taking very great care not to get out of his saddle and step on the beach. And all the people just gawped in wonder at him and spoke in a strange dialect of Irish that he could barely understand. And he said, where is the castle of the High King of Tara? Where is this? Where is that? Where is the other? And they said, these places are all ruins now. There is nothing left. Who are you, you strange man dressed in jewels? And sure enough, Ośin, he rode all across Ireland to all there was 5 high kings in Ireland. He went to each castle in turn, ruins, standing stones, burial mounds, desolate, quiet places that these new people stayed away from because they were haunted, supposedly. Ireland was a different place. And great sorrow was upon Ośin's heart, so it was. And he made a decision to go back to Niambh now. He'd seen what he needed to see. That little itch had been scratched. She was right, he was wrong, but he needed to do it. That's right, my boy. So he's riding back to the western coast, ready to ride back across the sea. But this great burial, this great standing stone, this megalith, right, it had fallen across the road, and there was about 20 of these little people that passed for humans now, trying to lift the thing out the way in a great team of horses, and they couldn't move it. And without thinking, always helpful, he leapt out of his horse and shifted that whole thing right up, and everyone gawped at him in amazement and wonder, and then their faces turned to horror. And Ośin's like, what is this, something in my teeth? And he looks down at his hands. They'd shriveled up into little, almost skeletal hands, and he felt his back bow over, and he aged 300 years in the space of about 3 seconds. He barely had the power of speech, but he did have all the knowledge of all the stories, and that's exactly how St. Patrick found him. And Ośin spilled all the beans, all the stories of Irish mythology that we have. Ośin told to St. Patrick, and St. Patrick, studious little scribe he was, wrote them all down and put them in a book and charged £12.60 per copy. And that's how we have them now. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, mate. Well done.
Hey. Hey, right.
Thank you for indulging. Yeah, thank you, mate.
Thank you.
Thank you for indulging us. So, there we have it. 3 Celtic folk tales. It's a bit rough and ready, but yeah, there will be more of the same to come. I'm going to add a few more folk tales in this little show, and by the time we get back from Ireland, it should be really polished. So I'll share some more versions of this ongoing piece when we make it. See you later, guys. Thank you. And once again, if you want to support my work as a folklorist and a storyteller, do please follow me on Patreon, or give me a like and a subscribe, comment. It really helps me out a lot. All right, take it easy, guys. Thank you. Green like this. I've only done one side so far.